Hello everyone, this is Shannon from That's So Po, and today I'm doing week 5 of my 2020 reads. This week I read 5 books and I DNF'd 2. So the first book that I finished was The Prince of Ayodhya by Ashok K. Banker, which I buddy read with Ashley at Don't Have a Degree in Reading, who I will link below. This is such an interesting modern retelling of the classic Indian epic, the Ramayana. So Ashley and I had such an interesting time discussing this because on the one hand, this book is filled with so much cool mythology, and the story itself, the Ramayana, is such an influential text in Indian culture. So we loved reading about all of the different asuras, the different demons and things like that that were happening, and the way that the Brahmin powers were used. It was really, really cool in terms of mythology and culture, and it was written in a very modern epic way where, you know, you're getting the perspective of each of the characters and it's unfolding very much like a modern epic. However, it also was something that represented a lot of maybe the more classical versions of this story in terms of values and some problematic content. There was an intro at the beginning of this where the author talked about some of those choices, and I can understand wanting to stay true to the source material, but I definitely still struggled a bit with some of the sexism, ableism, and especially fat phobia. And the fat phobia, I'm not positive if that was something that was fully present in the original or if that was something that was just Banker himself, but definitely I struggled with some of those aspects of this story. Also, this story kind of moves a little bit slowly because it is a modern epic retelling. There's a lot of detail, and at times I kind of felt like we could go a little bit faster. I loved all of the classic aspects and the mythology, but overall it was an okay read, if not perfect. I gave it 3.5 out of 5 stars, and I don't think that I will be continuing to read on with this series, but I might eventually try to find a more condensed, more classic retelling of the Ramayana because I am interested in the story itself. Next, I finished When a Ghost Talks, Listen by Tingle, which is the sequel to How I Became a Ghost, which I read last week, and I really liked this sequel. So this is a historical fiction that is told from the perspective of a Choctaw boy who was on the Trail of Tears and died and became a ghost. So in this second story in the series, the boy is sort of learning more about the history of his people. So there's another ghost who is a great chief, and he's taking him back in time and showing him some of the interactions with the US government that led to the point of the Trail of Tears. And I really liked that historical context. I thought also that although there is death in this book, it's not quite as gruesome as in the first book, and I just really liked the focus on understanding your history and on learning how to handle some of these tough things that have happened in sort of the Choctaw experience. I felt very much that these stories have been written by Tingle for young readers who are Choctaw to understand and process their history, and I thought that that was really, really interesting. There were a couple of things that weren't so much my taste. There's like a real pacifism in these books, and I feel like I would just be a lot angrier. And the humor can be a little over the top sometimes, but it totally makes sense for a middle grade audience. So I gave the second book 4.5 out of 5 stars, and I definitely want to read the third one whenever it comes out. Next, I read Glory by Kahran and Regis Bethencourt. This is a photo book that also has some small bios about the models in the photos. It is an absolutely beautiful book and very, very inspiring. I heard about this from the Goodreads user ReadBecca, who is also a YouTube commenter, although they don't have a YouTube channel, but I highly recommend following them on Goodreads, and I will link their profile below because they read the coolest books, tons of SFF as well, and I saw them give a review for this and it looked so excellent, so I immediately borrowed it from my library. Basically, the photos in this book are these fantastical, beautiful celebrations of Black childhood. So especially girls, but some boys as well, with these very haute couture types of outfits, some that are historical, some modern, some futuristic, really gorgeous celebrations of Black beauty, Black hair, and just Black kids. All of the bios in this were also just really beautiful, reading about the different models. Some of them are, professional models. Some of them are activists, things like that. It was a very inspiring book, super quick to read through, and just the photos were fantastic. I gave this 5 out of 5 stars, and I highly recommend it. Next, I finished When the Tiger Came Down the Mountain by Nghi, which is the companion novel to The Empress of Salt and Fortune, which I do have a review for, so I will link that down below. And I'm gonna have a review for When the Tiger Came Down the Mountain coming up in a week or two as well, because I loved it. This was such an excellent fantasy novella. So just like in The Empress of Salt and Fortune, this is set in the same world and actually follows the same character, the cleric Chi, who gathers stories. But this time it's a completely different story that they're gathering. They end up going into the mountains and get trapped there, and there are some tiger women who want to eat them, and they stall them by telling them a story. This is just so great. It has the same excellent mythology and world building as the first novella. It does stand alone, so you could read them in either order, but I thought that this one also had a ton of humor. It was a really lighthearted and sweet novella. I thoroughly enjoyed this. So if you want more details, check out the review, which I'll have up soon, but I gave this 5 out of 5 stars. I definitely recommend it. And lastly, I finished The Little Nugget by P.G. Wodehouse. This is a humorous novella from probably the 1930s. Sush has been reading me all of the Wodehouse short stories and novellas as part of bedtime stories. And so we finally got through this one. We've been reading it for a couple of months. It is classic Wodehouse. It is sort of a comedy of errors, very silly, very fun characters type of story. The basic premise is that there is a boy, the Little Nugget, who is the son of very rich parents, and people keep trying to kidnap him. And we follow a guy whose basically fiance has asked him to go undercover at the school where the Little Nugget is attending in order to kidnap him, but then ends up having to protect him against other kidnappers. So there's a lot of humor in this. It is definitely funny. It's a little madcap. I think that really P.G. Wodehouse is so perfect for bedtime stories because it's just lighthearted fun. I definitely enjoyed this. It's nothing outstanding, but really a fun read. So I gave it 4 out of 5 stars. Then I did DNF 2 books this week, both of which were short story collections. The first of which was 9 Bar Blues by Sharee Renée Thomas. And this is a collection of sort of speculative sci-fi type of stories that also have this kind of focus on something very experimental. So I think that the writing in this was just beautiful, and some of the world building and the themes were really fantastic, but it was a little too experimental for me. So I got through 15% of this before DNFing, and at the point at which I DNF'd, I was just lost. I had no idea what was going on in the stories. I feel like this writing is a little bit above my reading level. It's very abstract in a lot of ways. There's a lot of thematic elements, but not as much sometimes concreteness to the stories. And I had no idea what was going on. Even though I found the writing very beautiful, I just wasn't able to follow what was happening. So even though I DNF'd this, I don't think that this is at all a bad collection. I just think that I wasn't able to grasp what was happening. And I think other readers may be totally into that experimental idea. This is based on the idea of jazz, right? Being very creative and experimental. So it might work for you. The other book that I DNF'd this week was Heads of the Colored People by Nafissa Thompson-Spires. This is a book that I was buddy reading with Judy Brown, whose Goodreads I will link below. And we had some really great discussions about this, but it ended up just not being quite my style. So I got to our first check-in, which was 29% of the book, and I was very impressed by so much of what this book was doing, and really the discussions that Judy and I had were great on this book. So it definitely has a lot to offer, even if it didn't 100% work for me. So these stories are really talking about the Black middle class experience. They are excellently written, really high quality writing. The themes are fantastic. The topics that are addressed are great. There's a lot to discuss in these, but the problem was the tone for me. So this has a very much a dark humor style. And even though I do like some types of dark humor, I like more the ones where there's maybe a dark situation, but you find the humor and light in that. This one is more reveling in the darkness itself, and there's just some really nasty characters that you're in the heads of, and that was so hard for me. But Judy thought it was very, very funny. So I think it's really just whether or not that tone appeals to you. But at least at this point, I wasn't able to handle that kind of darkness of character and being in the head of such mean characters. It was too much for me, so I ended up DNFing it, but I don't think that that's going to be the case for everyone, and it definitely is really well written and really interesting themes, so it might work for you. Okay, so that's everything that I read this week. If you guys have read any of these, if you have any thoughts, any comments, anything at all, go ahead, leave me a comment down below.